All right. So this set of notes is going to cover the differences in the types of countries that we have in the globe, um, which is generally divided economically about the economic conditions that happen in each country, and what types of characteristics might fall into that. Some global conflicts that have resulted that need to be highlighted. It's a fairly broad range of topics. So the first thing I want to talk about is the terminology that we're using. So we're going to use developed and developing largely, though know that according to this map, the United Nations divides countries technically into four sections. So developing countries, the wealthy countries for what you guys would think about, so the United States, Canada, most of Europe, right? Japan, are countries that are doing well economically. They have stable governments in place. You can think about literacy rates being high and that sort of thing. It's the wealthy countries in the world. Not to say that there aren't poor people living in those countries, but that the country as a whole is doing well. You also have economies in transition, which is sort of level number two. It's represented in orange on the map, right? These are the countries that are moving towards the developed stability. Orange is developing nations, right? So countries that are building their economies. If you notice, China is falling under developing countries according to this map, and according to really the United Nations in general. China is a country that we trade with a lot, but they have a lot of the other struggles that drop them down into a transitioning or a developing country, largely based on inequitable access for a lot of their country and the things that their citizens have. And then the last one is the red that you'll notice is in what's sub-Saharan Africa, right below the Sahara. Here's the Sahara. So sub-Saharan Africa and parts of Southeast Asia. And I think that one is, oh shoot, hold on. Sorry, totally blanked. Looked it up. It's Afghanistan, this one here beside Pakistan and Iran. Or Iran, sorry. Those are the poorest of the poor. You'll notice in the map here in the Caribbean, most Caribbean countries are considered developing countries. They rely a lot on tourism and that sort of thing to bolster their economies, but they're still fairly poor. But you maybe can tell that right there is a little bit of red where Haiti is. Haiti is one of the poorest countries in the world, and they struggle a lot economically. The problems that these countries have are wide ranging. So that's what this sort of whole video is going to cover. Refugees are a genuine issue globally, as people are moving out of a wide variety of reasons, but most notably the refugees coming from crisis situations. So I have a graphic that shows you the Syrian crisis that we've been dealing with in the last couple of years. Where the violence in Syria is really taking a toll. This image is from January of 2018, so as this video has been done, it's about 2 years old, showing that there are 11 million Syrians who have fled from conflict at that point, including they're not all outside of Syria. You'll notice it says there's 6.1 million people that are internally displaced. That means they had fled from one area, but they remained in Syria. The other half of them or so have left Syria entirely, fleeing straight into Turkey generally, because it's a more stable economic situation, more stable political system, and Turkey's much more accepting. And then a lot of those citizens, Syrian refugees, are taken out of Turkey and sent to other refugee locations around the world. In Lebanon, though, I want to highlight that Lebanon, 1 in 6 people, every sixth person that you might encounter is a refugee from Syria. So that's going to put a strain on the resources of those countries, right? We want to take care of people. We want to make sure that people globally are safe. But with a refugee crisis comes questions like, where are these people going to sleep? How are they going to eat? Are there jobs that are going to be available for them so they can get on their feet? What access are we going to be able to provide for them for? Like, think about the kids that have fled. They need to be educated. Their education system is being disrupted. If they're moving to a new country, they also need to, it's not just that they're like K-12 education. Like, think about like a kindergartner needs to learn his alphabet, and he needs to learn to write. He needs to start learning math, but he also has to learn a new language. He's been in a new country. His family members may have died. There's a lot of emotional support for people. So those are strains that are put on different countries based on the refugee crisis that we try to solve. There's also guest workers that are happening in predominantly in Europe. They happened all over the world. We used guest workers from Mexico in World War II. We had people come in during World War II to work in the big commercial farms in the Southwest. And then in the United States, the way it went down is that the workers did their jobs and then we didn't pay them based on their contracts, which was horrible and immoral, and also put a lot of tension on some relations we had with Mexico, because their citizens came and did us a solid and helped our economy, and then we reneged on the deal and we didn't pay them what they were supposed to be paid. In European countries, they have a lot of people doing it. They're coming from a lot of the Eastern European countries into the Western European countries to work temporarily. These are people on work visas. These are not generally people who are planning to stay for prolonged periods of time, to do some temporary stuff. But if you notice, according to that chart, 25% of the domestic staff in Great Britain, when this was put together, were all from another country. So they're fulfilling jobs. This was in 2016. They're fulfilling jobs that are being left unfilled, right? It was 18,000 people for a total of 215 or so thousand. No, I'm sorry, total of 215,000 care workers. I guess you'd have to add them all up to get the total number. But those guest workers are a hot topic, because a lot of it is, well, once they've lived in a country for several years and they make friends and they want to stay, and that transition of transitioning from being a worker to being like a foreign nationalist, someone living in your country, has caused some tension, especially anytime the economy goes down. People get a little uncomfortable with that situation, and they're worried that people are taking their jobs and that sort of thing, which is just simply not true. They're there because no one's filling those jobs. Ethnic conflicts around the world predominantly happen in developing nations or underdeveloped nations, the poorer countries. But if you'll notice, the Balkan Peninsula, which has developed countries in it, as well as Northern Ireland, which is a part of Great Britain, it's a part of a developed nation, also are on this list. So Northern Ireland, your issue is you have Catholics versus Protestants. We've talked about that since the beginning of world history too, right? That's been the argument the whole time. It started with the Protestant Reformation, but basically the issue is that in Northern Ireland there's a large Protestant population, so they voted to stay in the UK when Ireland broke off. And in the 1990s, in the late 80s and 1990s, there was a lot of violence and terrorist activity and militant groups in Northern Ireland. It became very dangerous. People died. If you want to see like a fairly kind of inappropriate but also comedic look at that time period, there's a show on Netflix called Dairy Girls. The language is really bad. It's probably rated R if you were rating it on the movie system. But it does a great job of showing what life was like for Catholics living in Ireland during that time period. In the Balkans, you had the Bosnian conflict, which we talked about when we talked about genocides. In the Bosnian conflict, there was a genocide where the Bosnians and the Croats were killing each other and trying to extinguish each other's groups based on ethnic background and cultural background. In the Horn of Africa, you have a lot of Somali pirating, right? This is Somalia, and there are a lot of piracy issues. If you've seen Captain Phillips, that's an example of a Somali pirate situation where an American captain was held hostage by some pirates. And I think it was the SEALs had to go and rescue him. It took a couple of days to get him back, maybe up to a week. But that's all due to inequity, where Somalia is a very, very poor country, and the Indian Ocean is a very hot shipping lane. And so people are making a living like taking over boats. Literally, that's what pirates do, right? They take over boats and they hold them ransom. And so that's what's happening in Africa. In the Middle East, you have the same arguments we've always talked about. You have the Jews, you have the Christians, and you have the Muslims all fighting against each other. You've got different parts of Christianity, different parts of Islam, and think about like the terrorist activity that's happening. You've got Al Qaeda, and you've got various militant groups in control of different areas. That's the tensions there. South Asia, it's the same argument. It's over religion. It's the Hindu-Muslim argument that was also happening in during Indian independence. All right, the impact of new technologies. These shouldn't be surprising to anyone, but this is the access to instant communication. The fact that you're watching this video from your house is an example of how the world has changed, right? I'm actually making this video during the coronavirus closure, where we made them specifically to upload for students who didn't have internet access. So that's an example of unequal access, right? In our own county, some of you can watch this live streamed, some of you can watch it on YouTube, but some of you had to have it downloaded to a Chromebook and delivered to you so that you could obtain your education. That's changing the whole world, right? Zoom meetings are a very big topic right now too, or Google Meets and that sort of thing, where we're working on building that access. And all of that is rapidly changing. I can't imagine trying to, when I was in high school, it would have been 2000, when I was a 10th grader, it would have been 2001, 2002. There's no way we could have done this. So I don't know how my school would have educated us if we had to close like this. The other thing to talk about in this video is genetic engineering and bioethics. This is the concept of cloning and that sort of thing. We have the ability to clone some species. We don't. It's very expensive, but it's part of research. And so genetic engineering is the modification of genes in order to produce a wide variety of things. Bioethics is basically the argument like, should we? Just because we can doesn't mean we need to, right? So should we be doing this kind of thing? I'm going to take a pause on this one, because this was about 12 minutes at this point. The next video that will follow is going to talk a little bit more specifically about the differences between developed and developing countries.